firms to make products that people want and discourage them from making products that they don't want. So back to subjective value. Economics as a discipline basically began in 1776 with Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations. Adam Smith was a moral philosopher who talked about a lot of different things through his career. In The Wealth of Nations, he was trying to figure out why, at that time, Britain, Scotland, and like Belgium, Netherlands, why they were becoming rich and why most of the world was still poor. In that book, which is like really thick, like 600 pages or so, he developed a lot of the tools and a lot of the theories of economics that we use today. He was mostly focused on people's material well-being in that book. He also wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiments, looking into what makes people happy. What things, I don't know, bring people joy. So he was more than just focused on economics, like we're going to talk about in here. But in The Wealth of Nations, he built his theory on the labor theory of value, which soon became like the dominant theory for people trying to do economics. And then when Karl Marx built his theory of communism, he built it upon the labor theory of value, which was dominant at the time. So among most economists, believe in subjective value. That's how we do our analysis. But those influenced by the Marxist school are going to build their theory on the labor theory of value. Basically, the value of a good is absolute. It's just the sum of the cost of production. It's the idea of the labor theory of value. Every good is worth however much it costs to produce it, and that's it. Because of this, you can have price gouging. You can have exploitation of workers who aren't paid as much as you're selling the goods for. All these come into play because the value of a good is absolute, not because it changes based on if people want it, if it satisfies their wants and their needs. So let's look at an example, like those white plastic folding tables. Do you guys place like a high value on them? You don't see a lot of people using them for their kitchen tables or dining room tables. For most of us, they're not very valuable. But if you go to the city of Buffalo, they turn out to be very valuable. For some reason, I don't know if there was a folding table accident or if there was, I don't know, the CEO of the company that makes them upset someone in Buffalo, but they love destroying those tables at their tailgates. For them, it's extremely valuable. In fact, when they played Jacksonville last year, the city of Jacksonville banned selling those tables to anyone without a Florida license. So what do we have people do?
Pay people from Florida to get them tables.
Exactly. And they paid far more than the price of what it took to... This isn't a joke. They were willing to pay far more than the price of what it takes to make a white folding table in order to get it, because they valued it so much, because it's a Buffalo thing to break those tables now. So the other problem where these people were more than willing to pay $25 for a $10 table because it made their tailgates better. That's like we talked about before. Like, people have different wants and different desires. For some reason, that's their desire. So in the 1870s, and what economists call the marginal revolution, they began to rethink the idea of where value comes from. Adam Smith couldn't solve the diamond water paradox, where even though we need water to live, diamonds cost more money. The basic idea of subjective value is that the value of a good or service is determined by each individual. Because we all have different wants, we all have different needs, every good and service has a different value for us than for other people. So each individual assesses whether they want the good and how much they'd be willing to give up for it. And this isn't just in terms of money, because for most of us, money doesn't bring us happiness. Having a bunch of cash in your wallet doesn't help you out, or zeros in your bank account. It's about what you can buy with that money. So the value that we place on a good is, what we're giving up to get it. So the other possible goods that we could be getting for that. And like I said, it's dependent on every individual's needs. So how much value they think they're going to receive from the good. If they don't anticipate that it's going to help, make their lives better, it's not going to be valuable to them. And that can change based on a person's situation. So take water. If you want to put it in like a squirt gun to shoot your friend, you're not going to be willing to pay a lot of money for it. You're not having a lot of fun. But say it's like the day after pre-patties and you're terribly hungover, you'd be willing to pay a decent amount of money for that water. So it's subjective value that allows mutually beneficial exchange to occur. If I don't value something very highly, but you do, I can sell it to you, and take that money to buy something that makes me better off, that I would like more. Neither of us are taking advantage of each other, even if it costs less to make that product than I pay for it, because I value that good more than I value the other goods I could buy with that money. And here's a quick video talking about
Start by telling us a little bit
subjective
about
value.
what Austrian economics is.
Well, Austrian economics as a school of thought refers to the tradition that really began in the late 1870s, and it's traced back to Carl Menger, who published his book Principles of Economics in 1871. And Menger was one of three founders of what today we call the marginal revolution, which was a paradigm shift in economics, where economists moved from focusing on the labor theory of value to subjective value and the role that played in individual decision making. And then from Menger, you have Eugen von Bavarick and Frederick von Wieser, who followed him, and then up to Mises, Hayek, and more modern day Austrians like Israel Kirzner, Murray Rothbard, and Ludwig Lochmann.
Can you say a little bit more about that transition from a labor theory of value and more objective conception to the subjective?
Well, prior to the marginal revolution, the standard kind of consensus around how economists or political economists viewed value was that the value of a good or service was dependent on the amount of effort or labor that went into either producing or securing that good or service. And what Menger emphasized, as well as the others in the other two founders of the marginal revolution, but especially Menger, was that value was not some objective function or inherent in the good or service itself, but rather was dependent on the value attributed to it by other individuals. That is, it was in the mind of the actor. And so if you think about it, you or I or someone else might invest significant amounts of labor, resources, and effort in producing something, but unless consumers, that is other individuals, value it highly, irregardless of how much we invest, they will not purchase it or be willing to exchange a high amount of goods or resources to secure that good or service. And that's really what, in a fundamental sense, what it was all about. Subjectivism, and what some people like Kirzner call radical subjectivism or radical ignorance later on, which is related to that, is a hallmark of the Austrian school.
One of the issues where the Austrian school really came to prominence was in the 1920s and the 1930s, the debate over the ability of people to be able to calculate and make economic decisions in the absence of a price system, a market system. Can you talk a little bit about the Austrian school's role in those debates?
What today we call the economic calculation debate really started in the early 1900s. And the debate was a purely technical one, that is a pure debate over economic theory. And on the one side, as the name of the debate implies, there was the socialists who wanted to nationalize the means of production. That is, in its original form, the argument was that they wanted to completely eradicate private property and the unit of exchange, so money. And the argument was that in doing so, they could rationally plan economic activity such that you would either equal or outproduce what capitalism could produce. Capitalism, of course, being defined as the private ownership over the means of production. So the socialists argue that they could either equal production or outproduce in terms of material wealth what capitalism could do, but also at the same time overcome a variety of the ills of capitalism, so things like inequality, unemployment, business cycles, and so on down the line. What Mises and Hayek came in and argued is that absent private property rights over the means of production, you would not be able to have exchange because you can't exchange things you don't own. Absent exchange ratios, which emerged out of exchange, by exchange ratios I mean prices, there is no way for economic actors to gauge the relative value of alternative resource uses. In other words, there is no way for economic actors to gauge the opportunity cost of using resources in one line of activity as compared to another line of activity, all of which are technologically feasible. Mises, for instance, one of the things he said, to paraphrase him, is that planners wouldn't know if they should use platinum to make railroad tracks or to use it in jewelry, for instance. The reason we know how to use it is because producers of railroad tracks know it's too expensive to be used in that line of production. And the reason they know that is because of the price of it. Those prices are traced back to exchange. And so that's really the core of the debate.
It ties directly back into that initial insight about subjectivism that Maker makes in the Marginal Revolution. So you have what might seem like a relatively abstract or theoretical exercise, this conversation about the origins of values, subjective or objective, that turns out to have these massive real world stakes because you're talking about these grand social experiments in places like the Soviet Union.
That's right. And so really what this all comes down to at its very core is really the wealth and poverty of nations. That is what allows a society or prevents members of a society from figuring out how to best use scarce resources to produce goods and services that they and other consumers value. That's really what, in some sense, what economics is about, but also what economic development in the broadest sense is about. And so this debate, which again, many people simply kind of think of the history of thought episode, which it was, and it's important on purely those grounds, but it also has a lot of relevance, real world relevance, as you pointed out, even today.
All right, so that kind of takes us from the idea of subjective value, and later on in the video, he talks about what that means, but what it means for our next step here. So what are the role of prices? And these serve an important function. They're not just, randomly chosen. They're not just an obstacle for us between getting what we want. They reflect certain realities, the realities of what are the uses of those goods and services? How many of them are there out there? So why is the price of beachfront homes high? Anyone answer that?
I guess you could say homeowner insurance is probably more expensive. And just constructing them on you said probably more expensive to do in general.
Okay. So there's higher costs going into it.
Yeah.
Any other reasons?
Socially, we value beachfront properties as more expensive. It's cheapest, so you could get a townhouse in the middle of Charlestown.
You're right. Did I see another hand up? All right, the basic idea, how awesome is it to live on the beach? Right, wouldn't we all like to live there? Or most of us like to live there? How some people prefer the mountains. Not the Appalachians, but really nice looking mountains, like the Rockies. But, so a lot of people want to live on the beach, but there's only so much coastline we have. And only so much coastline can actually be used. So because there's that limited quantity, but there's a whole lot of people that would like to live there, they end up bidding up the prices. The high price reflects the scarcity of the number of beachfront properties. It's also, I don't want to jump ahead. Yeah, it's also a signal. So there's two roles of prices. Prices serve as a signal, and they serve as an incentive. So a signal that aggregates and it transmits knowledge. So for those beachfront homes, people highly value them. It's a way to signal to home builders, to people that own property along the coast, that it's really valuable to put a house here, that someone would really like to live there. So instead of putting, say, a random factory there, or a random store, they know they can make a lot of money by putting housing there. And they can buy cheaper land, inland a couple miles, put the factory there. Knowledge is spread out all across the economy, from like every individual person, and all of it isn't known by like any one person, because there's just so much out there to know. A lot of it is held within each individual, and a lot of times we don't even realize until we end up acting. It also serves as an incentive. So price changes encourage people to consume more or less of a resource or a product. So if the price of something goes up, people are going to buy less of it. If there was a shortage of something in here, say there was like a shortage of paper to take notes, we might all together talk and say, okay, like everyone split this up evenly, we'll all take a couple, and then that way we'll all have it. But it takes coordination, and that's tough to do for like a whole giant economy. But with the price, the way the price works with incentives is that the price increases, people are going to be able to afford relatively less for the same amount. So they're going to end up consuming less. It ends up being the same as if everyone in the economy got together and said, hey, there's a shortage, like let's try to conserve this so everyone can get some. Because the price increases, people are going to buy fewer, and then it ends up conserving in like the same exact way. So in a way, it helps coordinate human action. It helps coordinate people without having to get everyone together and discuss these things. It also aggregates and it transmits knowledge. So if people suddenly start liking, I don't know, vegans weren't like a thing, like a big thing like a decade or two ago. But a lot more people become vegan. Firms don't need to know how the particular individuals that are becoming vegan. They can see the price increase of the limited amount of vegan foods in the past and know, they then realize more people must be becoming vegan, and they produce more of that. So because you see this change in price, firms or individuals are able to tell that there's changes going on, and it transmits that knowledge very easily, very simply. Also, resources and goods have many alternate uses. And prices help you determine whether you should use a good or a service for a particular use. So if a good is valuable to someone, if they see they get a lot of usage out of it or a lot of enjoyment from it, they'll be willing to pay more for it than someone who's going to get less value from it. When they're willing to pay more, when they actually pay more, that signals to others that there are more highly valued uses for that good or service. So others are going to respond by what we call economizing, by using less of a good or service, or they're going to substitute to another one. Let's see. Yeah. So so far, this has been the best method to conserve resources for those who value them most. Works better than trying to convince people that you need it more, that you value it more. Just by being willing to pay more for it, you demonstrate that it's more highly valued, and it changes people's behavior to act as if they're helping conserve it for you. So why isn't this desk made from gold? Or why isn't it made from platinum? The reason is that there's so many more valuable uses. There are uses where people can get more value than by using gold or platinum to make a desk. Whoever made this realized they can make it out of this, well, it's not really wood, it's like particle board. Whereas they can make out a particle board for a lot for a lot less money. So the prices signal to them that there's a much higher use for gold. What happens when the price of oil increases? So gas goes up from $2 to $5. Are people going to drive as much? No, let's say it's due to a demand or a supply shock. So there's less gas than we expected. Maybe a hurricane knocked out a refinery. So the price increases. People are going to use less gas. So we still have, enough gas to go around. Everyone can get some gasoline to drive, but because it's so much more expensive, they're not going to drive as much as they did before. They're going to economize. They'll find other uses. Maybe they'll start riding bikes or they'll walk more. Maybe they carpool. Figure out other ways. Land has a ton of uses, and prices help determine the best use of land. So let's say there's like a struggling old ski lodge. Its glory days are in the 80s, but now it's far in the past. So some developer buys it. They end up fracking it for the natural gas and, I don't know, just destroying Party Mountain. This is a good thing because the economy valued the natural gas, the potential energy we got from it, than from a crappy old ski lodge that hasn't been good since the 80s. For those that don't know, that's a plot to an episode of It's Always Sunny.
I've never seen that.
Oh, the gang hits the slopes. It's making fun of all those corny 80s skiing movies.
South Park does a good episode of that also.
Yeah, it's basically like the same thing. That's a scene where Frank makes a model of like the mountain and Charlie thinks it's candy, so he just picks off pieces and starts eating it. So there's a vast amount of knowledge that's required to know the value of all the alternate uses of a resource. It's nearly infinite just for one resource because there's almost an infinite number of products that you could use it in. So the amount of knowledge it would take to figure out what the value is in each one, how much consumers would like it, just for that one resource would be immense. So you don't understand, it would be hard, impossible to aggregate all that knowledge and combine it together in real time. Plus you don't know the sum of all the individual preferences. You don't know what every single person out there wants and how to meet their needs. You don't realize that. You can't learn that until people start actually buying the product. So what happens is prices aggregate this knowledge to signal the value of relative uses. So you can see that, gold's really expensive, so they save it for either like things like jewelry, ornamental stuff that provides value, or using the small amounts of it that's still really expensive in things like microchips, which is also incredibly valuable for us. So people can easily see a price change because of the change in the relative scarcity of a resource. They can't easily see why. I mean, you'd have to go around and ask like every single person, but you can see that things are changing and it signals that. And that's why firms have to do like market research. They know something's going on, but they don't know why. So they have to attempt to figure it out. Yeah. So we don't know in the moment why prices are changing. So for example, imagine the price of milk increases in the store. Could it be because there was a decrease in supply? Maybe there was a drought, so the cows couldn't eat as much, so they were able to produce less milk. Could it be that there was an increase in demand? Suddenly more people want to drink milk. Could it be something else? Milk is used as an intermediate good in like the production of cheese. Maybe millennials, they stopped eating the avocado toast and now they moved on to like making those charcuterie boards. Excuse me. That's probably why they still can't afford houses, right? We don't know immediately when we see the increase in the price of milk. We don't know why it is. It could be any of those reasons. It could be other reasons. Not even the government, no giant corporation can aggregate all this information. They can only try to learn from it over time as the prices change, as they learn what's going on. So when people get together, imagine getting together in a market, when we come together to buy goods and services, it's a coordination of individuals that are all acting in self-interest. So we're looking at human action and interaction right now strictly in the role of commerce. Obviously, people are self-interested. They want to do what's best for them, their family, their loved ones, their friends, but most of all them. In the proper institutional setting, in the right place, this self-interest benefits all of society. So if you can align the interests of the individual with the interests of society, then human nature, by taking its course, will make everyone better off. So people can get rewarded by doing good for others. They're going to be, they'll do that. So an institutional setting where people have strong property rights, there's a rule of law, there's peace, efficient government. It's not really an institution, but people have trust in each other. In this type of setting, people's self-interest and society's self-interest aligns. And when you see that, we see markets functioning at their most efficient. The example I gave for the angel and devil test last class, the Oxford versus Glasgow. Oxford in the British system, the schools paid the professors out of an endowment. So they would do what's best for the school. They really didn't care about the students, about giving the students good lectures or anything. While in Glasgow, in Scotland, they were paid by the students. Because they were paid by the students, the professors would try to give them good lectures, to give them good classes, to be interesting. In that case, the students and the professors' incentives aligned. They both wanted, in the case, to have good classes. In Oxford University, and the example they gave was Oxford, but it was across England, their incentives didn't align. And now the market, it's an example of meta-coordination. The idea of meta-coordination is that people, without planning, without getting together and talking about it, seem to be acting in unison towards a common goal. So an example is the path up there to JFK, like the dirt path through the trees. That was just a foot, there used to be all grass in there, but it was worn down by people walking, just trying to cut through the distance. And over time, people doing it together creates a footpath that wears down the grass. If you go to the Bryn Mawr campus, there's two big buildings on opposite corners of their quad, and they didn't put a sidewalk in between the two big ones. So there's this giant path worn through there. There's one cutting to the field house. It cuts across at that angle into the parking lot. You guys know which one I'm talking about? Right by the parking lot over by Eastgate behind the field house. That used to be, before they redid campus a couple years ago, that was a worn path for people walking. And they came in and actually put down a sidewalk because so many people used it. Another example of meta-coordination is language. No one person sat down and invented the language. If there's any non-native English speakers in here, you know that English is extremely ad hoc and seems to have no rules. Because it's been built up by many people over time just trying to describe what's going on. Trying to describe, what they see. It's also a terrible combination of a Germanic language, and the Norman language. watch another video talking about coordination.
And former professor Chris Coyne, Chris of the F.A. Hayek Program for Advanced Study in Philosophy, Politics, and Economics at the Mercatus Center. His most recent book is Doing Bad by Doing Good, Why Humanitarian Action Fails. Chris is here to talk with me a little bit about Austrian economics today. So thank you for coming in, Chris.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
You could describe Austrian economics as the economics of knowledge. Sometimes people say that unique emphasis is a defining characteristic of the study. So can you just say a little bit more about what it means to bring knowledge into the conversation?
So what oftentimes is referred to as economic knowledge, or the knowledge problem, oftentimes people refer to what Hayek's talking about, really goes and can be linked back to, and really it's important to link this back to the calculation debate. And so Oskar Lange and others who fall into this camp of what today we call the market socialists said, look, Mises, you're right, we need some market prices, but we don't need full market prices. That is, we can still have central planning, but we can have markets in final consumer goods and in labor markets. And we'll just do exactly what you all do when you teach students, which is we will tell firms, the planners will, they'll tell firms to set price equal to marginal cost and to minimize average cost. And if you do that, just like the model of perfect competition suggests, you'll get allocative efficiency. Hayek comes in then and says, well, wait a minute. This argument, this market socialist argument, makes makes numerous huge assumptions, but it makes one really important assumption, which is that you have access to the cost curves. What Hayek was saying is there is no way for planners to access the relevant economic information. They can do stuff, they can ask people, what do you want, for instance, and people can tell them things and they can produce it. But what Hayek's capturing is that is not capturing the full cost. That is not capturing the cost that economists talk about. The only way to access that knowledge of time and place, that context-specific knowledge that Hayek talks about in most detail in his 1945 paper, The Use of Knowledge in Society, is through markets. And for instance, Hayek uses an example. He says, look, imagine the price of tin increases. Economic actors do not have to have any gauge whatsoever as to whether the price of tin increased because of demand-side influences or supply-side influences or both. They will change their behavior accordingly. And so what he's capturing in that story, that illustration, is that prices both capture this context-specific information and communicates it to people extremely efficiently. Now, many people misinterpret Hayek and they act as if, okay, if we just have enough computing power, if we just engage in enough search, for instance, to collect the relevant information, then we can do it. So we can have some kind of algorithm. For instance, Amazon, puts up recommended books on your page when you log in, on your account page, based on your previous buying behavior. And people say, well, why can't we just replicate that kind of thing to produce paper towels or coffee? We can just do the same thing. But that misses out on Hayek's fundamental point, which is there's knowledge you can't capture. There's the opportunity cost aspect. There's daily, nitty-gritty information that you can't capture. For instance, I'm sure most people have heard of an organization that loses someone that's worked there for 15 and 20 years, or 20 years. And it could be in the most, roles that are considered relatively menial. So you might say, oh, that's an administrative assistant. We can replace an administrative assistant. That's quite easy to do. There's lots of people that have that basic skill set. But then the new person comes in. And it's not that they necessarily lack the basic skills of how to do administrative activities, but you say, how do I get X done? Who do I go to see this? And they won't know. Where the previous person would have said, well, I know exactly how to get that done. You see this person, you see that person, and you can accomplish your end. That's the kind of local knowledge that Hayek was talking about. That's the one aspect of the local knowledge that Hayek was talking about. And those type of things cannot be captured by search. It cannot be captured by hiring more people with PhDs and having them sit down and figure out complex algorithms and so on. It has to be discovered, as Hayek said, anew each day through the market, and that's the reason behind his emphasis on the knowledge aspect of economic activity.
One of my favorite works by Hayek is The Constitution of Liberty.
I will stop the video there. So the most important point I want you to take away from this is that it's through acting in the market, through buying and selling, that we reveal this knowledge, that we learn this stuff and we understand it. That we find out what's going on, what people want, and the best way to make it for them. These aren't things we know ahead of time. We can't we can't figure out consumer wants. We don't really know them for sure until people actually act on them. You can have as many like, I don't know, bring in as many like test groups for a product as you want, but until you actually put it on the market and see if people are willing to put down the money and actually buy it, you don't know if it truly meets consumer needs or not. All right. With that, we've been talking for a while, so let's take a break. I'll ask each side of the room, ask a question about anything, just so we can relax and recharge our brains for a few minutes. So since there's more of you guys, we'll go someone over here.
Where would you want to travel?
That's right, I didn't answer the question. I would love to go to Ireland or Scotland. Travel the countrysides and like see all like the distilleries there. Someone said San Diego. I forget who. I went there over like New Year's for a conference. That's like one of the most beautiful places. I don't know if you've ever been there. It's awesome. How about you guys? You can't let me do all the talking. You know how hard that is? All right, I got a question. How about we'll do this for everyone? How do you guys feel about tipping? You like it? Do you think it's annoying? Like, yeah, like waiters and waitresses. Well, that's normally where we use it. Sorry, I cut my finger during class on the corner.
I think it's annoying, it's not a set price, but it's also like mandatory because they're getting paid like $2 an hour and they rely on it.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I like tipping. I'll try to be like at least 25%. Other part of me wishes that like maybe just a little bit more. Actually, I can see like they earn an extra like 5 or 10% I'm giving them than the norm.
Anyone else have thoughts?
I don't know, I think it's like, it's nice to do. They're human beings too. They're not trying to go out and like screw your dinner up or something. Like they're just trying their best. They got like 10 different tables, you know, work through.
Yeah. I always feel bad when like someone like in the kitchen messes up, and like you can see like the waiter or waitress like, oh crap, they're gonna bitch at me. It's one thing when it's like their fault, and, like they know it, but like when it's not their fault, and they're like they know they're gonna get it anyway. I always feel really bad for them then.
So when I was in Norway, they don't do tips over there. It's all included in like their salary. But with that, a water costs like $7 for like a glass of water. So like it's kind of a trade-off. And people like don't tip sometimes, and it's like kind of crappy. But I think that's like the problem you face with, because some people tip really well, other people don't. So it's a hit or miss with tipping.
Yeah.
But if it's included, it's just like can't get around it.
And think of how incentives work. So you look at somewhere like Norway, where they're just paid a flat salary. So their quality doesn't matter. If they do a bad job, they're still getting paid no matter what. Maybe something like the patron will bitch to the restaurant owner, but you're not like losing money on it. Whereas where people tip, if everyone tips and they tip based on quality, then the really good waiters and waitresses end up making a lot more money than the crappy ones. So it's a way to sort out the bad ones and get them to take a different job that they're more suited for, and to keep the good ones like working. Like I have a couple friends that would work in restaurants in college, and they would. My one buddy was like, I should just drop out of college and do this full time because I'll make basically the same as I'm gonna make like for my career at the very least starting out. Because they were like so good at it. I have no friends who weren't so good, didn't make such good money. Because there's no like degree or training program ahead of time. Restaurants don't know how good someone's gonna be before they hire them.
Doing it in the wolves.
Yeah, so they just throw them out there and they say, well, if they don't do a good job, I'm only paying them $2 an hour. The rest is all tips. So if they don't get any tips, they'll quit soon. I'll get someone good in there.
That's another good idea, the turnover rate. It would kind of make people say, I want to work there, I want to work there. And depending on the area that restaurant's in, can really where you find actual good talent.
But do you need to worry about turnover rates is the big thing, because if you have so many people that need a job, like high schoolers, like college age people, like you have a plethora of people, especially if you're in somewhere like Pittsburgh, like it probably wouldn't really matter what your turnover rate is, because you just have a continuous supply of workers.
Any other thoughts on how it works, I guess? I generally like tipping because of that. Because you can reward people for good quality and it helps encourage good wait staff to keep going. But it is annoying when you get the bill and then like you're gonna have to pay a lot more than that. I always feel bad for like people that work breakfasts too. Because like 20% of like your like $10 meal for breakfast is a lot different than 20% of like your like $40 meal for dinner. I don't know. There's definitely pros and cons to both relying on tips and to not relying on tips. Oh, did you guys know the XFL is starting in like next week? It's like a minor league football league.
I don't think
But-
you call it a minor, it's just separate.
It's
Completely.
less talent than the NFL.
It's more show than it is skill.
Yeah, it's started by one of the guys involved in pro wrestling.
Vince McMahon.
Is it televised?
What's that?
Is the XFL televised?
I think it's gonna be televised. Well, no, the AFL was televised, so this has to be televised. Well, my friend was texting me this morning about going to a DC game, February like 8th, 9th. Like that weekend. 'Cause I just heard like Chad Ochocinco was trying out as a kicker. So I thought it was gonna be like a while till the league started if they're still doing tryouts.
You know, someone can play kicker. It's like a Taysom Hill situation. You can play kicker, running back, punter.
Imagine having that. Imagine the fake kicks he could do.
Yeah.
With Chad Ochocinco. It was funny because at one point he I don't know if he quit football or just in the off season was like trying out for a minor league soccer team. I remember seeing that on like back when he was playing. He's such a weird guy. He's gonna be perfect for the XFL. All right, so jumping back into it. Prices are not perfect. I don't want you to think that. They don't represent all the knowledge as possible. It's just all the knowledge we have out there, and it's constantly changing. As conditions change, people's wants and needs change. The supply and demand of goods change. We're constantly discovering new knowledge, so that's helping change the price to reflect those changing conditions. But these imperfections in the prices, the lack of knowledge that's out there, the lack of goods that meet all our needs, attracts entrepreneurs. If you take one of Dean Fry's classes, he'll talk the entire time about how awesome entrepreneurs are. And I don't know, I'm here in this class to tell you the same exact thing, I guess. Entrepreneurs profit from better meeting consumers' needs than they were being met before. They find a way, they discover some new opportunity to profit, to meet consumer needs. That's how they make their money. That's what they do. They discover new ways to solve problems. So they end up making profits for themselves by having a successful company or by creating a successful new product, and they make society better off because they better meet people's needs. Now, this could be a brand new product that they discover or that they invent. It could be just a better way to make a good. They make it cheaper, they use fewer resources, and there's more resources left over to use somewhere else. There's lots of different things you can do to be an entrepreneur besides just starting your own business. So not only do prices aggregate and disperse economic knowledge, very important functions, they also incentivize people to solve the problems we face. Because if you can solve those problems, you can make a lot of money. So this means that prices help drive discovery. So high prices for goods we want might be annoying to pay. It might suck that you can't buy as much as you want, but it encourages lower priced goods later on. That's what Amazon has been doing, is finding a cheaper way to get you books and now like any product you want online. They try to operate on maximum efficiency. So the mechanism by which this discovery happens is this ignorance. We don't know how to create this good, or we don't know this consumer need yet. It results in an imperfect world and imperfect prices. There's ways to make it better, but we're ignorant on how to do it right now. The prices that result from this imperfection provides opportunities to profit if someone can figure out how to do it. So you end up with these problem solvers, these risk takers that devise a way or are able to create the product that meets those needs. And by doing that, if they're successful, they're able to profit. Now this feedback that they get, the profit and loss mechanism, prevents the errors from continuing. So say an entrepreneur comes up with what they think is a product that solves a problem, that meets consumer needs better, but it actually doesn't. If that's the case, then they're not going to earn a lot of money from that profit or from that product. So the feedback from not making that money prevents them from continuing with that crappy product that doesn't actually meet consumer needs. And when they do make a profit, the successful entrepreneurs, that feedback shows other people, other entrepreneurs or other businesses that are already established, that these are needs that consumers have that you can make money from filling. So you guys give some examples of entrepreneurs. You guys still have to pick an entrepreneur in Business 101 and talk about them? That's the only thing I remember from Business 101.
Gary Vaynerchuk,
What did he do?
he started a wine business and that his dad started, he grew the wine business. And then now, most recently, probably one of the best entrepreneurs. He lived in New York, New Jersey, Minnesota.
So how did he innovate? How did he meet consumer needs that weren't being met before?
I don't know, I just know that the wine business was small, and so he just started just continuously just putting it out there to everyone. So someone noticed and they just
So was it a higher quality wine he's putting out? Or was it,
yeah.
see, wine's hard because the acidity in the soil, completely changes the taste. So you could have, I don't know if it was tastier wine or it was made with better grapes. But clearly there's a desire from consumers for more wine that he was able to meet.
Mark Zuckerberg created a better way for people to connect.
Yeah. I was gonna say, what did Zuckerberg do? But I think everyone knows that. Yeah, people wanted a way to stay in touch with their friends, to be be able to joke around with them, to share them. Well, memes didn't really exist back then. So that's what Facebook does. Right, you get it for free. I thought my parents were like paranoid when I was like a kid, and they'd be like, the internet, they steals your information. Well, that's Facebook's like business model. All right, gonna get one more? All right, so for my, go ahead.
Cuban.
What did Cuban do?
It started like it was like a professional sports. I can't remember if it was like a broadcasting like website or if it was like a betting website. But and that took off. But he basically like in the early stages bought out his partner, and then his partner got like really mad because he ended up making billions off of it and other things. But yeah, he has a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, so let's go with the sports website. I'm guessing it's that because like gambling is
I'm pretty sure it
illegal in
was
some of the
like,
states.
yeah, pretty
Yeah.
sure it was like broadcasting.
People wanted to get more sports, wanted to be able to watch it, so he met that need. Okay, so there's a piece, I didn't tell you to read it ahead of time, but a piece on Canvas from Don Boudreaux, so like a quick, it might just be like an op-ed from a newspaper actually. He talked about the role of prices. The basic idea, the economy has unexploited opportunities. That there's all these ways we can make the world better. All these ways that it could be better. The role of the entrepreneur is to find them, to figure them out and exploit them. Your basic economics, I said Econ 101, but like if you learn the basics of economics and you ignore this process, you're missing like the biggest part. You're missing what's really the interesting part and the value that we can provide. These unexploited opportunities can be thought of as a market failure, where the market fails to improve the human condition as much as possible. I mean, that's really what the market is for, so we can exchange goods and services and make ourselves all better off. Because of mutually beneficial exchange, making myself off also makes you better off if we trade. So entrepreneurs improve the functioning of the market, and they help meet everyone's needs better. That's how they profit, and that's their function within the market. And markets have all sorts of errors that allow entrepreneurs to improve our lives. So with the sports broadcasting that Cuban did, that's providing entertainment. People are now getting more entertainment because they love sports that they couldn't get beforehand. They're also getting more information, learning more about sports. If you want to keep up with your team, just find out what happened last night. You can tune into his company and find out. It could be products, it could be like tastier food, it could be better clothing, it could be, I don't know, warmer buildings. It could be something, more closer to a need, or it could be things like a want. But there's an almost unlimited number of ways to make the world better, or opportunities for entrepreneurs to profit. So when you think of entrepreneurship, there's basically two types and two schools of thought about this. The first one is entrepreneurship as a discovery process that Israel Kirzner talked about. Basic idea is that there's ignorance out in the world, and they've discovered these new ways to do it, and it improves everyone. So, just think of like the usage of the internet and computers throughout like the 90s and the 2000s, being incorporated into businesses. It makes them much more efficient and much easier for them to meet consumer needs. The other idea is from Joseph Schumpeter about creative destruction. And in creative destruction, one new entrepreneurial idea, instead of being able to be used by all the former industries, it destroys those industries. So car manufacturers put out horse and buggy manufacturers. Cassette tapes are replaced by CDs, which are replaced by MP3s and streaming. So for creative destruction, the old industries are destroyed, and newer ones, better ones, replace them. Whereas in the discovery process, one improvement builds upon the other. So anything that leaves out the role of entrepreneurs is flawed and missing so much information about how the world becomes better, how we make these better products. The economy is full of errors and full of smart people trying to correct them. Because they're able, if they're alert and they can find those areas, they can make a lot of money. So these market failures, these ways that the market fails to improve our lives as much as they could, are a reason for either government intervention to improve them, which we're going to talk about later after we do all the supply and demand stuff, or opportunity for someone to innovate and profit. All right, let's end there for the day.